Hey guys, and welcome to one more episode of Builder Nation. For today's agenda, we have Scott Peters, president and co-founder of Construction Robotics, a startup company focused on advancing construction through the use of new technology. So, welcome, Scott. Super happy to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Honored to be here and excited to talk with you today.
Okay, so why don't we start this interview by allowing yourself to introduce to your audience, maybe share a little bit about your background, about what you have been doing lately, everything.
Yeah. So I'm one of the co-founders, as you mentioned, in Construction Robotics, currently CEO, and it's been a super interesting, wild ride. I never imagined I'd be developing robots for the construction industry, looking back at my career, but it's been a lot of fun. I started actually as a chemical engineer a number of years ago, and got into did my master's thesis on groundwater science and modeling and stuff like that. But I got into manufacturing engineering in my early days. Started my career with Intel and then was with General Motors, and so got more and more into manufacturing engineering, automation, and then started to get into robotics. And as I started to really understand the potential for robotics and the impact on manufacturing and how we were leveraging automation to help efficiencies and safety on the manufacturing floor, was about the time that I got introduced into the construction industry. Found my business partner who was a longtime experienced veteran of the construction industry. And, he, I think, introduced it in a very interesting, unique way, talked about the labor challenges, talked about many of the problems they had in construction were related to, labor, planning, coordination, and talked about the ways they were trying to address that. But ultimately, at the time when we started to think about this, there wasn't really a whole lot of people looking at robots for construction. So we decided that was the direction we wanted to take and started down the path. And it's been an interesting one, a lot of great stories to tell, but I'm super excited about where we are and where we're going.
Okay, really interesting. And what was the first idea you ever pitched?
Yeah, early days, we brainstormed a lot of different ways that we could help impact the construction industry. And at the end of the day, our focus was on labor and safety, how we could improve labor, be more efficient, but then help people be safer. At the end of the day, it's people that are building buildings, and so we want to help out there. And so we looked at how we could use robots to take very highly repetitive tasks. And one of the first tasks we focused on was bricklaying, right? Bricks. They're relatively small, and you put a lot of them together to make big walls. And here we're in Rochester, New York, and here in upstate New York, there's some great examples of some huge campuses with brick buildings on them. Eastman Kodak has a lot of bricks, and RIT and University of Rochester, and so a lot of these places have these huge brick buildings. And so there's this great example and understanding of how you take these small components and they're just assembled together to build and facade these big, beautiful buildings. And so we said, we really focused on this idea of using robots to take the repetition and the monotony out of it, and let the mason focus on the craft, let them focus on the finished product, the artwork, and let them really engage in next generation technology so they could attract new people in the industry and extend the careers of people that were currently there. So that was the original idea, was the bricklaying robot, and we launched it back in 2014 was the first commercial job that we were on. 2013-14 timeframe, first commercial job that we were on with our early prototypes, and come a long way since then.
Okay, wow, it's been a long road, I will say.
Yeah.
And how did you come up with the idea specifically of SAM? Like, how long did it take you and your co-founder? I don't know how big your team was at that point in order to build it.
So early days, it was a pretty small team. I think that the idea around SAM, there was a few years in the making. We worked with a number of universities and different groups to help augment our team, but we were pretty small at the time. A lot of different concepts for how SAM was going to be deployed. And actually the first version of SAM, the first prototype we built, that laid some of the very first bricks on a commercial job site here in Victor, New York, was ultimately very different looking than the commercial version, right? And that's kind of how it goes. We built a prototype, learned a lot, and then continue to evolve it from there. And now we're expanding into many other products and areas. So.
Okay, and initially when you first started, were you scared of what people could say about robots replacing human labor or something like that?
It was a huge conversation for us for a lot of years. And I think our philosophy has always been that it's about how do we help augment and support the workforce. Our vision has never been to have the autonomous workforce, at least not anytime in the near future. And we know that buildings are built and need to continue to be built by people, but we also know that there's ways that we can increase efficiency and safety of those people. So I think in the early days, there was a lot of anxiety about how to get the labor force to really embrace new technology. And I think we learned a lot about it by working very closely with the trade associations, with the unions. We got a lot of feedback. Not all of it was positive in the early days. And I think as we really listened to them and tried to engage the workforce, we learned a lot about how to continue to evolve SAM and robotics. But then also it really informed the decisions about some of the new products that we've come out with, such as the Mule and the lift assist revolution that we're driving, and really how that can embrace the labor force and support them on the way to more autonomy in the future and more robotics in the future.
Oh, this is really interesting. And I mean, how long did it take you in order to launch Mule after SAM? Was it like a couple of years? Was it like after a couple of months?
Yeah, it was a few years. So SAM, if you haven't seen it, you could check out. There's a ton of great videos of both SAM and Mule on our website, construction-robotics.com. But SAM is a brick lane robotic piece of equipment. It's a brick lane machine, and the way SAM works is it picks a brick, applies mortar, and then puts it in the wall. And it needs to be set up by the masons. So the masons do the layout. They put story poles up. They create the maps. They interact with the machines. There's typically a team of 2 to 3, sometimes more people on the scaffold, and they're loading bricks and mortar. They're helping to run the machine, and then as Sam puts the bricks in the wall with the mortar on it, they're coming along and striking joints. And there's always a bunch of manual work that needs to happen. You're flashing your wall ties, and even some manual bricks around certain windows and openings. So it's a very collaborative process. But it was in the market. So that's SAM, and then the Mule is more of a lift assist product, and I'll talk about it. But SAM was in the market, for about 3 years when we came up with the idea of Mule and launched it shortly thereafter. But the idea of the Mule is really it's a smart lift piece of equipment. Material unit lift enhancer is what Mule stands for. But Mule, it takes the heavy lifting. That's what it does. So the idea is with the Mule is it's a piece of equipment that is right next to the worker. It's got a 12-foot arm. And then there's a gripper that travels up and down a cable. But the really interesting thing with the Mule is when you come down, you click a button and it grabs that block. Now it can float up to 150 pounds and make it weightless. So, my 7-year-old kid who's super strong, but can't lift a 100-pound block over his head. But you take you use the Mule and he comes down, you grab that block, and now that block can be lifted, with a finger. So there's no strain on your shoulders when you're coming up over rebar. When you're lifting hundreds and hundreds of block a day, thousands of pounds of this repetitive motion injury and awkward, placements when you're reaching, you're lifting high, you're doing damage to your back, bodies, and shoulders. And everybody that you talk to who's had a grandfather, a father, an uncle in the construction industry knows what a toll it takes on your body, knows how exhausted you are when you come home every day, and knows that at the end of your career, you're not lifting your grandkids up over your shoulders because you've lifted way too many block. And so the idea with the Mule is that we wanted to focus on the safety aspect. So we just said, we're going to take lifting out of the equation. And when you look at productivity, the Mule really, there's 2 things that prevent a mason. A typical mason maybe lays 100, 200 block in a day. That's a lot of weight. But there's really only a couple things that prevent them from laying 1,000 block in a day. It's fatigue. They get tired, they just get physically exhausted, or it's logistics. They don't have enough material on the job site. They got to move around. There's other things they have to do. They're just not stacking block all day. There's many other aspects to the work besides just lifting and placing block. So we've taken a fatigue off the table by using the Mule so that the contractors can focus on logistics and drive their process forward to drive increased productivity, increased efficiency, and get jobs done faster. But at the end of the day, the biggest win for us is that the masons go home feeling good. And I can't tell you the number of stories that we've had where these contractors have come up to us, shaking our hand and tell us, hey, I had 2 shoulder surgeries. I needed to retire, but by using the mule, I can come back and work longer. Same thing, back injuries. They go home at the end of the day and they say, just the ability to not have to take a nap the moment I get home, to be able to play with my kids or my grandkids. It's an absolute game changer. And for us, we're 100% convinced this is the way we need to be building buildings.
Wow, I love this. Thank you so much for sharing. Because at the end of the day, okay, yes, you're doing an improvement for the construction industry, but it's also the human part that you're not missing as a founder, So that's great. I love hearing this.
And I think for us, that's really, robotics are awesome, and I'm super intrigued by the technology, how fast it's moving, how much it's advancing, and there's some really, amazing companies out there pushing the envelope about where robotics will go in the future. But for us, when we look at construction, and there's many other aspects within other industries too, but when you look at where robotics can really help society, it's in areas where we can improve safety, we can improve productivity, we can help people achieve more. Without putting themselves in harm's way, without sacrificing their body for a paycheck every day. We have the technology nowadays to do things smarter and better. And that's a big part of what we talk about. We talk about building smarter. And that's a big focus for us.
That's it. And I mean, talking about the mule, since you already gave us a pitch, what do you say the life expectancy of a mule is?
I mean, with all equipment, there's maintenance. And so absolutely, the mule needs a little bit of maintenance, but it's really not a lot. It's a relatively straightforward, simple piece of equipment to maintain. It's robust, it's reliable. There's moving parts. So there's things that need to be monitored, checked. There's wear parts on it. There's a wire rope and needs to be checked, inspected, and replaced every so often. But for the most part, the life, is pretty long. And so we've been out there with our first mule for 5-6 years now, and it's still operating great and has got a lot of life left in it. And so we expect that the life for these products will be pretty long. And again, the longer you maintain it, what's the life of a car? A lot of it depends on how well you maintain it, how much you take care of it, and how much you want to extend the life. It's pretty similar with the mule. The current mule product lifts up to 150 pounds and makes it weightless. But when we look at lifting, our vision across the industry is that there's a lot of products out there that are lifting the heavy stuff, right? When we're building buildings, there's a lot of heavy things you're lifting, thousands and thousands of pounds. When you're doing, bridge construction and things like that, you're constantly lifting big, heavy things. And then there's other technologies. So that's kind of on one end of the spectrum. When you look at dexterity and capacity, right? There's a lot of pieces of equipment that have very high capacities, but don't have a lot of dexterity. You need an operator in a crane or in a telehandler or in a lift, and then you need somebody typically on the end of the hook that's on a walkie-talkie trying to communicate and guide them in. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got a lot of new products, exoskeletons and things like that are great for supporting your body for lower capacities. If you're supporting your back, supporting your shoulders, if you're lifting 10, 20, 30 pounds, and then there's active and passive exoskeletons. What we see is in this smart lift category, we're in the sweet spot really between, call it 50 pounds and roughly 1,000 pounds. So you get above 1,000 pounds, you start to really need some different technologies, and you're not moving very fast. But when you want to move fast, you want high precision, you've got high repetition of a product, that's where the smart lifting is going to be an absolute game changer in the construction industry.
Oh, this is really interesting. I had no idea. Okay, that's great. And I mean, talking about challenges, what would you say that it was the biggest technical, or that it has been the biggest technical challenge that you have ever managed to solve since you ever build up the company?
Yeah, there's been a lot of them. And I would say, when we look at the challenges that we face, there's technical challenges, which I'll touch on, and then there's change management. And change management in any new industry is an absolute hurdle. And so I think that because we were one of the first companies in robotics in the construction industry, we were breaking the ice, and in a lot of ways, us and a few other leaders out there, we're really trying to drive change and educate the industry about the value of robotics, and not to be fearful of change with robotics and more advanced equipment, but really to be open to it, to embrace it, and to see the benefits that it can provide to you and your company. So that's a big challenge, is change management. But on the technical side, when we started down the road with Sam, there was a lot of robotic technologies and equipment for inside factories, for environments where they're bolted to the concrete floor, where you control your inputs, you control your outputs, you've got trained operators working on it every day. And so we had to tackle problems right from the beginning about how are we going to deal with, this robot on a moving scaffold? How are you going to deal with the fact that you're constantly, you're going from one wall to another, and then one job to another. And so the environment that you're setting up in every single day is changing. And many times throughout that day, it's also changing a lot of times. So you've got all this variation you're trying to deal with. And so the robotic system needs simple ways to set up. It needs to be smart. It needs to function outdoors. It needs to be in these dirty, dusty environments. And a lot of the core technology, when we started down that path to support all of that advancement, wasn't really there. So we were starting from scratch in many ways. And so it's exciting for us to see the advancements in the industry with vision, with LiDAR, with other technologies that are starting to open up the ability to do more and more external robotics in these difficult environments. So there's some big technical hurdles. One of the interesting ones, I'll tell you a quick story. One of the really interesting hurdles was how are we going to pump the mortar, right? So there was a lot of robotic challenges around how are we going to deal with dynamic compensation, how are we going to deal with accurate placement, wall mapping, all that stuff was really fun and interesting. But one of the fun ones for us was the mortar, because we apply the mortar to the brick. So we had to figure out how we were going to move mortar. There's a lot of pumping technologies, but for this particular application, we needed precision, and we needed it really simple and easy to clean out every day. And so I remember the day when one of my engineers brought a meat grinder in because he was making sausage over the weekend and said, this is going to be our mortar pump. And that became our first prototype mortar pump. So instead of stuffing sausage, with meat, we stuffed some things with mortar to begin with. But a lot of fun things like that happen when you're, I think, in the early days of developing technology. You got to really push the envelope and think creatively.
And the fact that you have a great team as well, I would say, a really creative team, I will say. And I mean, one of the last questions, like, okay, you had the pandemic, we all had a pandemic. Did you find any procurement challenges?
Yeah, there definitely was some procurement challenges. Supply chain. We've got to be nimble and quick. There's a lot of electronic components that go into our equipment that we needed to change course on and engineer around because they weren't no longer available. Just like I think everyone is dealing with. There were very real challenges. You had price increases with steel and many other things that you had to manage as well for your customers. So no question that those were some big challenges. But I think that we were fortunate that we were able to navigate around those, and we were also fortunate that I think the construction industry remains strong and our value proposition also remains strong. And really throughout the last couple of years, we've seen tremendous growth. And one of the big drivers was, because we took the heavy lifting out of the installation masonry, we were able to partner with material suppliers to actually change how they design materials. And so over the last couple of years, the number of available oversized material, this idea of this, like a standard block, excuse me, in construction in the US is 16 inches long. And it weighs about 30, 40 pounds. And then you got, that's 8 inches deep. And then you have 12-inch block that are about 50 pounds. And those are great for using with the mule. But what we started to do is work with the manufacturers to produce larger materials. So these, 32-inch long block, which now weigh about 75 to 100 pounds. Well, it's very difficult to lay by hand, but the benefit is if you use the mule, you double your productivity. You're able to achieve more, you bid more projects, you can be more economical in bidding, more profitable for the contractors. And so as that started to take off right around 2019, 2020, we were fortunate that kind of shift in the industry has driven a lot of positive change for us. And then just to, manage the supply chain on the back end, where we've been able to see very strong growth for our company over the last few years.
Oh, okay, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, a lot of companies in the industry really did have a lot of challenge. And last but not least, do you have any advice for future entrepreneurs starting on this path?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that looking back, there's so many lessons learned over the years. I think that, when you start out on the path, when I wrote the first business plan, I think the vision that we had was very different from where we are today. And that's okay. And inevitably it's going to change. You got to be nimble, you got to be flexible. But at the end of the day, the team that you create, the team that you're around, that's really everything. And so, pick a great team and I think just keep marching forward and be flexible along the way, because change is going to happen, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's inevitable. So, well, thank you so much, Scott, for taking the time for sharing your experiences with us for sharing things about your company that we didn't know. So it's a pleasure. And do you have any social media handles? Where can people find you? Where can we follow you?
Yeah, we are on social, we're on LinkedIn, we've got YouTube channels, we're on Facebook, construction-robotics.com, and you can follow the Mule. You can follow, our videos, our technology, the SAM. So a lot of exciting stuff, but definitely come visit us on the website, come find us on YouTube, or connect with us on social media, and you can see all the exciting things happening and some of the amazing projects that are being built today. We've got a really exciting video coming out here in the next couple of weeks about some of the big projects that are being built today using Mule and oversized block. So really cool things.
Oh, it's great. I mean, I have seen the YouTube channel and I can tell you it is great. I mean, the fact that you are sharing like the behind the scenes of the company, I think that's amazing. So remember, guys, that you can also find more information, interesting articles, interesting interviews directly on our website, controlhub.com/builder-nation. We would love to hear from you. And once again, Scott, thank you so much for taking the time. This was really interesting. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. It was great talking with you.